Chapter 12. The goldfish man turned around and smiled questioningly at Ma and Ba, who could do nothing but continue to stare. He was slender and small, which was perhaps why it was easy to mistake his footprints for Minley's. The dragging lines Ma had thought were from Minley's walking stick led to his cart, and the bowls of goldfish caught the shifting beams from the sun, slivering it into flashing sparkles of light. The goldfish man's eyes also flashed as he looked at Ma and Ba and their dust-covered clothes and haggard, tired faces. "Can I help you?" he asked them. "We were looking for our daughter," Ba stammered. "We are from the village of Fruitless Mountain." "You sold her a goldfish and then," Ma sputtered, "and then she ran away to change our fortune." "I see," the goldfish man said, and again he looked at them, at Ma's tight, angry frown and Ba's careworn, worried face. "And you are going after her to stop her?" "Of course," Ba said. "We need to bring her home." "Yes," Ma said. "She's acting crazy. Who knows what could happen to her?" She could succeed," the goldfish man said steadily. "She could find a way to change your fortune." "She's trying to find Never-Ending Mountain," Ma said. "Ask questions to the old man of the moon." "There is no way for her to succeed." "Yes," Ba said. "It's impossible." The goldfish man looked a third time at Ma and Ba, and this time they felt it. Under his gaze, Ma and Ba suddenly felt like freshly peeled oranges. Their words fell away from them. Inexplicably, they felt ashamed. "Let me tell you a story," the goldfish man said. The story of the goldfish man. My grandmother, Lao, was a famous fortune teller. People from faraway villages would line up at our home asking for lucky dates for weddings and predictions for their children. If she was ever wrong, we never heard it. But a week before my 19th birthday, we heard her moaning in her room. We rushed to her. We found her sitting on the floor with her fortune-telling stick spread around her. To my surprise, as soon as I entered the room, her piercing eyes fixed upon me. "You," she said, "you will die next week on your birthday." It was as if she had exploded a firecracker in the room. My parents and aunts and cousins burst into exclamations and wails. "Is it true?" "It is true," my grandmother insisted. "I have checked and rechecked over and over again, and the sticks always say the same. Next week, on his 19th birthday, he will die. That is his fortune." I could not believe it. How could this be? But my belief in my grandmother was unshakable. If she said so, it must be true. I stood staring as my family created a storm around me. Finally, I said with a mouth as dry as sand, Lao, is there anything I can do?" "There is only one thing you can do," she said, "but it is doubtful it would work." "I'll do it," I said. "First," Lao said, "we must get a bottle of the finest wine and make a box of sweets." So Lao went to the rich magistrate of the town and persuaded him to give her a bottle of his best wine. My mother and aunts hurried to the kitchen and prepared cakes, cookies, and sweetmeats with more care than ever before. Before the aromas of the delicacies were captured in our most ornate box, they floated in the air, causing all the neighborhood animals to whine at our door. And then Lao went to her room and began to read her fortune sticks. When she came out, she gave me the box of sweets and a bottle of wine and sat me down. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "You must do exactly as I say. Tomorrow morning you must walk north of the village. Do not stop until the moon begins to appear in the sky. When it does, you will see a mountain before you. And at the foot of the mountain, you will see an old man reading a book. Open the box of sweets and the bottle of wine and set them by him, but do not say a word unless he speaks to you first. This is the only chance we have to change your fortune." So the next morning I followed her instructions, and it was as she said. I walked all day, and when the sun finally withdrew from the sky, there was a vast mountain in front of me, whose tip seemed to touch the moon. Sitting cross-legged at the bottom was an old man reading a giant book. The light from the moon seemed to make him glow silver. I opened the bottle of wine and the box of sweets and quietly laid them next to him. Then I sat and waited. The old man didn't notice me and continued to read. My mouth watered as the smell of the sweets drifted in the air, but I didn't move. And even though the old man was engrossed in his book, he must have smelled them as well, because without lifting his eyes from the page, he began to eat. It was only when the bottle of wine was empty and he was eating the last cake that the old man lifted his head. He seemed surprised to see a half-eaten cake in his hand. "I've been eating someone's food," he said to himself. He looked up and saw me sitting nearby. "You, boy, was this your food?" "Yes," I said, and I came closer as he beckoned. "Well," he said to me, "what are you doing here?" I told the old man my story while he rubbed his beard. When I finished, he said nothing but began to turn pages in his book. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, it's true," the old man said. "You are to live only 19 years. And he turned the book toward me, and in the moonlight, I read my name on the page. Next to my name was the number 19. "Please," I couldn't help asking, "isn't there any way to change it?" "Change it?" the old man asked, surprised at the thought. "Change the book of fortune?" "Yes," I nodded. "Well," the old man said, stroking his beard, "I'm indebted to you for having eaten your food." He took a paintbrush from his robe and studied the page. He said to himself, perhaps. Yes, this is how it can be done. With a simple flick from his brush, he changed 19 to 99. "Good," he said to me. "You now have many more years of life. Live them well." Then he closed his book, stood up, and began to walk up the mountain, leaving me staring behind him. I sat there until he disappeared from sight, and then turned around and went home. The next week, on my birthday, there was a terrible typhoon. The wind howled as it had never had before, and a tree fell right on top of the roof of our house and crashed into my room, narrowly missing me. If it had fallen just a little bit more to one side, I would have been easily killed. And as I climbed out of the ruins of my room, I saw my grandmother's eyes staring into mine. Silently, she nodded. She did not need words to tell me what had happened. I knew my fortune had been changed. But for Millie to try to do that is different, Boss started. She's trying to find never-ending mountain. Ask a question. She's just a small girl. Perhaps, the goldfish man said, you need to trust her. But, Ma said, what she wants is impossible. Impossible? The goldfish man said. Don't you see? Even fates written in the book of fortune can be changed. How can anything be impossible? Ma and Ba could find no words. His eyes and the hundreds of eyes of the goldfish behind him seemed to silently scold them. As they looked at the ground, the goldfish man shifted his bag and turned toward his cart. Here, a gift, the goldfish man said, placing a bowl into Ba's hands. The fish, the pale silver color of the moon, circled in the bowl. Perhaps if you cannot trust your daughter, that your daughter will find never-ending mountain, you should trust that she will return home to you, because that is not impossible. So whether Minley brings it to you or not, I wish you good fortune. With a bow, the goldfish man walked away. His bowls of goldfish cast pieces of rainbow in the air, making him sparkle in the sun. Ma and Ba stood and watched him until he looked like a twinkling star in the distance. Chapter 13. After cutting the dragon free, Minley's knife was dull and the skin on her fingers and toes was wrinkled from having been in the dragon's lake of tears for so long. She was also very thirsty. The dragon offered to carry her to the freshwater stream. He knew the forest well. You'll get there much faster, he said. Minley was a little doubtful about riding the dragon. It was one thing to climb on top of him while he was half covered by water. But now on dry land, she realized how large he really was. The dragon was long as the street in front of Minley's house. If he stretched himself up on his arms and legs, he was as tall as a bird's nest in a tree, she realized. Even now, bending down for her, he was higher than her house. But he bent his elbow for her like a step, and with 2 hands, she boosted herself up and then climbed onto his back. The round ball on the dragon's head was the size of a small melon. just big enough for her to wrap 2 hands around, and she clutched it as the dragon began to move. It was faster, but not much. The dragon was nimble, but his large body had to constantly maneuver around trees and rocks, so it was awkward going. The constant jerking made Minley feel like she was riding a huge water buffalo. As the dragon ducked underneath branches and swerved through trees, Minley understood why most dragons flew. "Dragon?" Minley asked suddenly. "How old are you?" "Old?" the dragon said. And again it seemed a question he had never been asked. "I do not know." "Well," Minley said, "how long have you been in this forest?" The dragon thought hard. "A long time," he told her. "I remember when a bird flew from the sky and dropped a peach pit onto the ground. I watched that pit grow into a tree, and the peaches fell from the tree, and more trees grew from the pits of those peaches until it became the grove of peach trees that the monkeys have now taken over." "He is very old," Minley thought to herself, imagining the growth of the trees. "Dragon must have been in this forest for 100 years. And she felt a pang of pity as she imagined the dragon, alone, unable to fly, endlessly struggling between trees and branches. After picking up her things and drinking at the fresh water stream, Minley climbed back onto the dragon's back. She soon fell asleep, and her head on the dragon's ball, and her hand holding her rice bowl. Noticing she was asleep, the dragon moved slowly and quietly, even when the water from Minley's compass splashed and trickled down his nose. It was only when a loud shrieking filled the forest that Minley woke. It was such a wild and harsh noise that she bolted up, her eyes wide open in fear. "Do not worry," the dragon told her. "It is just the monkeys." And it was the monkeys. Even though the sun was dimming, Minley could still see the monkeys clamoring in the trees. Even though Minley could not count that many of them, their screaming made it sound as if there were thousands. "We're getting close to the peach trees," the dragon told Minley, "and they are getting angry." "Stop here," Minley said. She climbed off the dragon's back, and she could still see the monkeys through the leaves and the branches, their bared teeth flashing. "Those peach trees are exactly the direction we want to go," Minley said. "We have to get past the monkeys." "I could still force my way through, but the monkeys would attack you," Dragon said. "I'm not sure if we could get you through unharmed. Listen to them." And the monkeys continued to scream. Minley covered her ears with her hands, but she could still hear them. It seemed like they were screeching, "Get away from here! Ours, ours, all ours." "You're right," Minley told the dragon. "They are not going to let us through." But you said that is the way to the old man of the moon," said the dragon, "correct?" Minley nodded. The monkey's shrieks were starting to sound like hysterical laughter, getting louder and louder, like a volcano about to erupt. She looked from side to side, but the monkeys seemed to be everywhere. There was no way around them. Then the dragon asked, "What are we going to do?" Chapter 14. Minley and the dragon had sat in the clearing and made camp for the night. As the sun fell and the moon rose, the dragon showed her how he could make sparks by scratching his claws against a stone, and they built a small campfire. As Minley and the dragon made no moves to go further into the forest, the monkeys had quieted down, but they still watched. "There are plenty of peaches for all," Dragon said. "Those monkeys do not have to be so greedy." "Really?" Minley asked. "Yes. The monkeys are so foolish. They just want more and more even when they do not need it. I have seen them refuse to let go of rotten mushrooms and fight over piles of mud." At those words, Minley sat up and her eyes flashed with quick thinking. Piles of mud. Suddenly, Minley remembered the 2 children fighting over their piles of mud as she had left her village. Instead of going inside for dinner, the children had clung to their pretend dishes of dirt. They were so foolish. Could the monkeys be that foolish? They were too selfish for trading or bribes, but maybe they were so greedy that they could be foolish enough to be tricked. Maybe it's "I'm going to make rice," Minley said abruptly. "Oh," the dragon said, "you must be hungry. Too bad we cannot get you some peaches." "It's not for me," Minley said, and she smiled mysteriously. "It's for the monkeys." "The monkeys?" the dragon said. Why? If you mean it as a gift or as a way to bribe them, it will not work. They will take it and eat it, but they still will not let you through. That's what I'm expecting, Minley said, as she filled her pot with water and uncooked rice. She was bursting to tell the dragon her idea, but wasn't sure how much the monkeys understood of their words. She looked at him with sparkling eyes, but he only stared back blankly. You are, the dragon said. I do not understand. Don't worry, Minley said, and with her eagerness, she felt like the water she was boiling. I think I know how we can pass the monkeys. The dragon watched as Minley stirred the big pot of rice. Through the rising steam, he could see the beady eyes of all the monkeys glittering through the branches, like hundreds of diamonds as they watched her as well. The monkeys are watching, he whispered to Minley. Good, she whispered back. I hope they are. When the rice was done, the pot was overflowing with snowy white rice. It was so heavy that to take it off the fire to cool, she had to ask the dragon to move it for her. Minley had the dragon place it very close to the trees where the monkeys were watching. Then, Minley tied her fishnet over the rice and the pot. As Minley and the dragon turned away, they could hear the monkeys chattering. That fishnet will not stop the monkeys from taking the rice, the dragon said. It is tightly woven, but their hands will probably fit through. I know, Minley said, as she put out the fire. Let's pretend that we think the rice is safe and we are letting it cool. Though puzzled, the dragon nodded. They placed themselves a far distance from the rice, yet still within sight, put out the fire, and pretended to go to sleep. But Minley could not help peeking, though she tried to lay still. She was filled with excitement. Would her plan work? Would the monkeys take the rice? In the bright light of the moon, the monkeys glanced slyly at them and stole over to the rice. The dragon was right. Just as he said, the fish net could not keep the monkeys from the rice. Their slender hands slid through the holes of the fish net and each grabbed 2 big fistfuls of rice. But as the monkeys tried to carry the rice away, the net caught them. The holes in the net were large enough for their empty hands to fit through, but not large enough for their full fists. The monkeys screamed and pulled, and Minley and the dragon no longer pretended to be asleep. They couldn't help laughing as they watched the monkeys struggling to punch the air and each other with their trapped fists. Minley quickly packed her things, and the monkeys screeched and shrieked as they passed. The heavy pot of rice shook as the monkeys fought violently to get free. But the fish net was strong and well woven, and since the monkeys were too greedy to let go of the rice, Minley and the dragon entered the peach grove and continued through the forest.